Right. And I'm so glad that you brought up that clip of Netanyahu. Anyone can watch this on YouTube. And what it is it's a clip of Netanyahu in the year 2000. He had already been the prime minister once at that time, but he was out of power at that time. And he's meeting with settlers. He's at the home of some settlers on the
Yeah.
West Bank. And at one point, he says, hey, let's turn the camera off. And so the way I remember it anyway, it's been a few years, okay? The way I remember is the little boy goes to turn the camera off, but he does not succeed in turning the camera off. And I think it's a mistake. I don't think he's like trying to secretly record Netanyahu. He just fails to turn the camera off. And so it keeps rolling. And the tape eventually is leaked. So when he talks about how easy it is to move America in that clip, what's he talking about? The subject matter is that Bill Clinton said that we got to give up the West Bank. We're going to go along. We signed on to the Oslo Accord, which was essentially like a 5-year plan to transfer to full independence for Palestine. The West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem will be a Palestinian state side by side with Israel. And they kept delaying and delaying and delaying, and essentially using the two-state solution as an excuse to never do anything at all. And what Netanyahu is explaining to the settlers is, so what I told Bill Clinton was, see, I told him, no problem, Bill. It's just that we have to keep Area C under Israeli military control because, for security purposes, we have to have military dominance in Area C. And I got Bill Clinton to agree with that. But then it turns out Area C is like 2/3 of the West Bank. So screw you, Bill, right in the face. I can do whatever I want to the president of the United States, and he can't do anything to me. And then the settlers say to him, geez, Benjamin Netanyahu, are you sure that you can just push the president of the United States around like that? And that's just going to be fine and no problem? And he says, the Americans are easily moved. 80% of them support us. It's absurd.
Well, he was right about that. He was dead on with the absurd comment. That's
and
for
here
sure.
we are. We're 20 years out from that conversation being secretly recorded, maybe 18 years out from that conversation being secretly recorded. And then what do the hawks say? Oh, yeah, two-state solution. Yeah. One day after we're done gobbling up the entire West Bank, then you can have it, even though there won't be any of it left for you to have. And even though everyone knows we're lying, and everyone knows that ever since Benjamin Netanyahu came into power in 1996, after Rabin was shot, Perez was in for a very short time. But then Netanyahu came in 96. The two-state solution has been dead since then. For 23 years, it's been nothing but a hoax. When in reality, Israel annexed the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and, of course, East Jerusalem, as well as Golan, back in 1967. And if anyone was honest, they would just say, all of this is Israel. And then the Palestinians should have only one demand, and that is the right to vote. And citizenship. We want full Israeli citizenship after all. We are Israelis, right? When they took Israel proper in 48, they cleansed all the Palestinians away, or almost all. It was 80-20, Jewish super duper majority. So you can have a Jewish democracy. I'm not saying it's okay, but I'm saying factually speaking, that's sustainable, right? But then ever since 67, they have occupied millions of people, but then they call it a temporary situation, occupation, until one day we'll have a two-state solution that never comes, which is just an excuse for keeping them completely subjugated, completely disenfranchised. Yeah. What if everyone was just honest and said Israel expanded their borders in 67? They already have annexed ever since then, whether they call it that or not. They have expanded the borders of Israel proper to include the West Bank, Gaza, and Golan, just as Trump just recognized in the form of Golan in a cynical way. And then just say, now, what right do the Israelis have to keep, the Israeli Jews have to keep half the population disenfranchised? When half the population of the country, never mind that they're refugees who have the right to return to their grandma's home that was stolen, but also just how do you keep them in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip living essentially as prisoners in concentration camps when they've committed no crime other than being born not Jewish?
Yeah. Well,
how sustainable is that?
The temporary occupation, it does remind you of that great Milton Friedman line. There's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. Reminds me of
Right.
Richard Nixon temporarily suspended the convertibility of the U.S. dollar into gold in 1971 or whatever it was. It's a long, temporary is one of those vague words, you know. I mean, if theoretically, if it ever ends one day, then yeah, I guess it is temporary. And so what's going on right now with Israel? I know that just like a week or two ago, there were some rockets that were shot into Israel, and a couple got through the Iron Dome, they say, and no Israelis were actually hurt in the process. But then, of course, is the typical kind of this cycle continues where then Israel goes in and kills a whole bunch of people in the occupied territories. And this seemed to me, my conspiracy bone is always a little bit touched when Netanyahu, everyone is saying, is about to go down for corruption problems, and then all of a sudden there's a war, and now I don't hear anything about that corruption anymore. But I don't know. What's going on there?
Well, so first of all, with the first rocket attack, from the beginning, Hamas denied it. Now, I admit I did not watch very closely to see, but what's very typical here, Hamas was not breaking the ceasefire. It's very easy for me to believe their claim that this was somebody who did this without permission. In fact, the Israelis, now that I think about it, the Israelis in the Jerusalem Post had a thing where they thought that it was an accident, that the rockets came from like a Hamas training center thing where maybe somebody screwed up and launched some things accidentally, but they said, well, whatever, we still have to hit you anyway. Typically what happens is this is Egyptian or Palestinian Islamic Jihad or a different group launches some rockets, and then the Israelis hit Hamas because Hamas is responsible because they're the government of the West Bank, so to speak. But which raises important questions right there. Look at all the double talk here, where Hamas is the government of the West Bank, and yet the West Bank is a prison. Of the Gaza Strip, and yet it's a prison. It's an occupied territory. Every bit of restrictions on those borders are not set by Hamas. They're set by the Israelis. Who's allowed to travel in and out when? Who's allowed to trade what? Their limit on how far out to sea they may fish. Of course, stealing all their natural gas just offshore that would in any other place would be their sovereign territory and right to produce that gas and all of this stuff. They call it a border. They go, oh, the snipers caught and shot some Palestinian Gazans. They're protesting at the Israeli border with Gaza. Well, but it's not a border, is it? It's not a Palestinian state. That's going to happen maybe one day, someday, never. It's a land under siege, right? And so, but they make it sound in a way like Hamas is a sovereign government there, that this is a nation state, the Gaza Strip, when it's not. It's an Israeli prison. Hamas are nothing but the trustees inside an Israeli prison in charge of administering the population in there. But that doesn't mean that they're sovereign in any real independent sense.
Yeah, that is such a great point. That's such an important point because it's that you can't have it both ways. So if Hamas is the government and they're responsible as the government, well, then Israel is violating international law by violating a sovereign government. Now, it's the same thing the American empire does with our foreign policy when we use the term war. So because we've never actually had a declaration of war or anything like that, we're like, well, it's targeted military action or something. It's not war. but then at the same time, if they ever need to hold enemy combatants or something like that, they're like, well, we're at war. Oh, well, we're at war. So the term is used only when it's useful. So they're a government for all the responsibility, but they're not a government that gets any of the power of an actual government. That's a very important point.